Imagine cruising down a river on a sunny afternoon when suddenly, without warning, a 40-pound fish launches itself 10 feet into the air and slams directly into your face, breaking your jaw and knocking you unconscious. This isn't a freak accident, but is happening hundreds of times every year across America's heartland, and the fish responsible are multiplying so rapidly that they now comprise up to 97% of all fish biomass in some sections of the Mississippi River. According to a landmark study published in Biological Invasions Asian, carp have caused sport fish populations to decline by 30% in invaded areas. Commercial fishermen on the Illinois River have lost 80% of their catch, and if these fish reach the Great Lakes, they could devastate $7 billion Australian dollars fishing industry that supports millions of jobs. These monster fish didn't evolve here, weren't released by careless pet owners, and were actually invited in by scientists and fish farmers who thought they'd found the perfect solution to an algae problem. Then flooding hit, the fish escaped. And what happened next turned America's greatest river system into a war zone where humans and fish are locked in a battle that is costing hundreds of millions of dollars with no end in sight. So how did a few dozen imported fish become tens of millions? Why do they fly through the air like missiles? And can the Mississippi River and Great Lakes survive this aquatic invasion? Let's find out together. Right now, you're looking at the Mississippi River Basin, covering over 1.2 million square miles across 32 states. And this is the largest river system in North America, the beating heart of America's agricultural heartland. For thousands of years, this system functioned in perfect ecological balance because paddlefish filtered plankton. Catfish scoured the bottom. Buffalo fish thrived in massive schools. And sport fish like bass, crappie, and bluegill provided recreation and food for millions of Americans. The water was so rich with life that commercial fishermen could make a living. Recreational anglers flocked here by the thousands, and the ecosystem supported everything from bald eagles to river otters to countless species of freshwater mussels. But in the early 1970s, something changed that would ultimately unravel this ancient balance. Aquaculture, the farming of fish in controlled ponds, was booming across the southern United States, particularly in Arkansas, Mississippi, and Louisiana, where thousands of ponds were being built to raise catfish, a fish prized for its mild flavor and firm white flesh. But these ponds had a problem because algae blooms would explode in the nutrient-rich water, turning ponds green, depleting oxygen, and sometimes killing entire stocks of fish. Chemical treatments existed, but they were expensive, labor-intensive, and often toxic to the fish themselves. So aquaculture managers began searching for a biological solution, something that would eat the algae naturally without harming the catfish. And they found their answer thousands of miles away in the rivers of China. In China's major river systems, including the Yangtze Yellow and Pearl rivers for species of large carp, had been farmed for thousands of years, and they were known collectively as the four great domestic fish, a cornerstone of Chinese aquaculture and cuisine. These fish had remarkable abilities because grass carp ate aquatic vegetation. Black carp consumed snails and mussels, and most importantly, silver carp and bighead carp were filter feeders that consumed massive quantities of algae and zooplankton, the microscopic organisms that formed the base of aquatic food webs. A single adult silver carp could eat up to 20% of its body weight every single day in algae and plankton. And bighead carp weren't far behind, consuming 5 to 10% of their body weight daily. To American fish farmers dealing with algae-choked ponds, these fish seemed like a miracle. And in 1972, the importation began. Bighead carp and silver carp were brought from China to fish farms and wastewater treatment facilities across Arkansas, Mississippi, Louisiana, Alabama, and Missouri, and the results were exactly what farmers hoped for. Because the carp ate the algae, the water cleared, and the catfish thrived. But there was a problem nobody fully considered. These were on small goldfish or docile pond ornaments, but were massive. Fast-growing, incredibly prolific fish with the ability to survive in almost any freshwater environment. Adult silver carp can reach 60 to 100 pounds. Bighead carp can exceed 110 pounds. Grass carp can hit 99 pounds, and black carp can grow even larger, and they mature quickly, reaching reproductive age in just 2 to 4 years. And here's the truly terrifying part. A single female bighead carp can produce up to 1.9 million eggs per year. And up to 3% of those eggs can survive to adulthood under ideal conditions. Do the math. One breeding female producing 1.9 million eggs with 3% survival means nearly 60,000 new adult fish from a single mother over her lifetime. A female carp can live for 20 years or more. The fish were kept in ponds, supposedly secure, supposedly contained, and for a few years, everything seemed fine. Then came the floods. Throughout the 1980s and into the early 1990s, severe flooding events struck the southern United States, and rivers swelled beyond their banks, inundating farmland, towns, and thousands of aquaculture ponds. When the floodwaters receded, the ponds were empty, and the carp were gone, swept into creeks, tributaries, and ultimately into the Mississippi River itself. Some researchers believe fish farmers also deliberately released carp that had grown too large for their ponds. Though this remains controversial and difficult to prove, but regardless of how they escaped, by the late 1980s, Asian carp were established in the wild, and they found paradise. The Mississippi River system offered everything Asian carp needed to thrive because it had warm water, abundant food, thousands of miles of connected waterways, and critically, no natural predators capable of controlling their population. In their native Chinese rivers, carp face human fishing pressure, specialized predators, parasites, and diseases that evolved alongside them for millions of years. But in America, they had none of these checks. Native predators like largemouth bass, pike, and muskellunge occasionally eat small carp, but once carp reach about 12 inches, they're too large for most native fish to consume, and they grow to that size within their first year. By 1995, carp populations were exploding, and by 2000, researchers began documenting something unprecedented. In some sections of the Illinois River, a major tributary of the Mississippi, Asian carp comprised up to 97% of total fish biomass. Let that sink in. 97%, meaning for every 100 pounds of fish in the river, 97 pounds were invasive carp, and only 3 pounds were native species. By 2010, commercial fishermen on the Illinois River were catching over 25,000 pounds of Asian carp per day, and populations were still growing exponentially. Today, experts estimate there are tens of millions of Asian carp in the Mississippi River basin, spread from Louisiana to Minnesota, from Ohio to South Dakota, occupying over 1 million square miles of connected waterways. And they're still spreading northward, heading toward the greatest prize of all, the Great Lakes. When an invasive species takes over an ecosystem, the impacts cascade through every level, and with Asian carp, those impacts have been nothing short of devastating. The fundamental problem is food, because Asian carp are filter feeders that consume phytoplankton, the microscopic algae that form the absolute base of aquatic food webs, and zooplankton, the tiny animals that eat phytoplankton. Every native fish species in the Mississippi, from minnows to bass to paddlefish, relies on plankton either directly or indirectly. And when Asian carp consume 5 to 20% of their body weight in plankton every single day, they're removing the foundation of the entire ecosystem. A landmark 2019 study published in Biological Invasions analyzed 20 years of fish survey data from the upper Mississippi River, comparing areas invaded by carp to areas still carp-free, and the results were stark and undeniable. In carp-invaded sections, sport fish populations, including gizzard shad, freshwater drum, and various sunfish species, declined by approximately 30%. And while in uninvaded sections farther upstream, sport fish populations actually increased by 35% during the same period. Correlation was impossible to ignore. Where carp arrived, native fish declined, and where carp hadn't reached yet, native fish thrived. Commercial fishermen have been devastated because on the Illinois River, which connects the Mississippi to Lake Michigan through the Chicago Sanitary and Ship Canal, about 80% of commercial fishermen quit after carp eliminated buffalo fish and catfish, the species they'd relied on for generations. Those who remained switched to catching carp, or the market for Asian carp in America is limited, because unlike in Asia where carp are prized food fish, Americans generally view them as trash fish in the meat, while edible and actually quite mild and firm. is riddled with hundreds of intramuscular bones that make filleting nearly impossible. Recreational fishing has also suffered because anglers report fewer catches, smaller fish, and degraded fishing experiences in carp-dominated waters. But perhaps the most bizarre and dangerous impact is the one that's made Asian carp internet famous: they jump. Silver carp, in particular, exhibit a behavior that's both fascinating and terrifying because they're easily frightened by boat motors. And when they hear the sound of an outboard engine, they leap out of the water at heights of 8 to 10 feet, sometimes even higher. Nobody knows exactly why they do this in America, when their relatives in Asian rivers rarely jump. But theories suggest it could be related to the extremely high population densities they've reached in North America. Or perhaps the founder effect, where the original imported carp happened to be particularly jumpy individuals. Regardless of the cause, the effect is clear. When boats pass through carp-infested waters, dozens or even hundreds of fish can launch themselves into the air simultaneously, creating a chaotic, dangerous spectacle, according to the Environmental Protection Agency. Reported injuries from jumping carp include cuts from sharp fins, black eyes, broken noses, broken jaws, broken ribs, broken arms and legs, back injuries, neck injuries, and concussions. Water skiing on the Missouri River is now considered exceedingly dangerous because carp jump behind boats. And in 2015, a viral video showed Washington University rowers being bombarded by jumping carp on Creve Coeur Lake near St. Louis, with fish slamming into boats and bodies in a scene that looked like something from a surreal comedy sketch. But it's not funny to the people who've been injured because a 40 to 60 pound fish traveling at high speed is essentially a living missile, and collisions can be severe enough to knock people unconscious or even cause life-threatening injuries. The U.S. Fish and Wildlife Service has warned that collisions between boaters and jumping silver carp have the potential to cause human fatalities. And it's probably only a matter of time before that happens if it hasn't already. Property damage is also significant because jumping carp have been documented smashing boat windshields, breaking radios, destroying depth finders, snapping fishing rods, and bending antennae. And here's the part that keeps Great Lakes scientists awake at night. Carp are now just miles from Lake Michigan. The Chicago Sanitary and Ship Canal, built in the early 20th century, connects the Mississippi River Basin to the Great Lakes through a direct water pathway, and it's the only permanent, navigable link between these two massive watersheds. If Asian carp enter the Great Lakes, the consequences could be catastrophic because the Great Lakes support a $7 billion per year fishing industry, including both commercial and recreational fishing, and they provide drinking water for over 40 million people. Lake Erie, in particular, is considered ideal carp habitat because it's shallow, warm, and nutrient-rich, exactly the conditions carp thrive in. And computer models suggest that if carp establish in Lake Erie, they could comprise up to 1/3 of total fish biomass within years. This would decimate walleye, yellow perch, and lake trout populations, species that support the entire regional fishing economy and provide food for millions of families. Faced with an invasion that threatened both the Mississippi River and the Great Lakes, authorities launched one of the most expensive and technologically sophisticated species in invasive species in American history. The first line of defense is the electric barrier system in the Chicago Sanitary and Ship Canal, operated by the U.S. Army Corps of Engineers. And this system uses underwater electrodes to create an electric field in the water that's supposed to repel fish. The barriers, which became operational in their permanent form in the early 2000s, emit electrical pulses strong enough to deter fish, but not strong enough to harm humans or damage boats. And they operate 24 hours a day, 365 days a year. But there's a problem. The barriers aren't foolproof because they need to be shut down periodically for maintenance. And during flooding events, fish could potentially be washed over or around them. In 2017, 4-year-old silver carp was found 9 miles from Lake Michigan in the Little Calumet River, above the electric barriers, and genetic analysis revealed that it spent months in the area before being caught. Nobody knows for certain how it got there, but its presence sent shockwaves through the scientific community because if one fish made it through, others could follow. Beyond the barriers, authorities have deployed multiple control methods. And electrofishing has become one of the most effective techniques because specialized boats equipped with generators send electric pulses through the water, temporarily stunning carp at the surface where they can be netted and removed. A typical electrofishing boat can stun and capture 100 carp per minute using 110 to 500 volts of electricity, and the technique works because carp jump toward the surface when stimulated, while native species dive deeper and avoid the current. Since electrofishing programs began, millions of pounds of carp have been removed from critical areas and in some heavily fished zones. Carp populations have declined by 30 to 50%. But here's the harsh reality: even removing 90 to 95% of initial carp, biomass would be necessary to effectively eradicate them from the middle Mississippi River, according to food web modeling studies, and current removal efforts are nowhere close to that level. Scientists have also experimented with acoustic deterrents because research shows that specific sound frequencies can repel carp. And the U.S. Geological Survey has found that 100 horsepower boat motor noise is highly effective at deterring Asian carp while having minimal impact on native fish. Experimental underwater speakers blasting boat motor sounds or other deterrent frequencies are being tested at key choke points to prevent carp from migrating upstream. Then there's the if you can't beat 'em, eat 'em approach, because in 2022, Illinois officially rebranded Asian carp as Kopi, a marketing attempt to make the fish more appealing to American consumers. The flesh is actually quite good, white, firm, mild tasting, and low in mercury because carp are filter feeders at the bottom of the food chain, but the bones remain a massive obstacle. Innovative companies are developing mechanical bone removal systems and processing carp into boneless products like fish cakes, fish sticks, and even pet food, and some restaurants in Illinois and Michigan and Tennessee have begun featuring carp on their menus. If a robust market for carp could be established, commercial fishing pressure might help control populations, but so far, demand remains limited. 8. The nuclear option being discussed is hydrologic separation, physically closing the Chicago Sanitarian Ship Canal to permanently sever the connection between the Mississippi and the Great Lakes. A 2012 report by the Great Lakes Commission concluded this was the only long-term solution to prevent Asian carp and other invasive species from moving between basins, but the economic and logistical consequences would be enormous. The canal moves billions of dollars in barge traffic annually, and closing it would disrupt shipping, require massive infrastructure changes, and cost potentially hundreds of millions of dollars. And legal challenges argue that federal law requires the Army Corps to maintain navigable waterways, making closure difficult or impossible. Now, after more than 30 years of invasion and over 15 years of intensive control efforts, the battle continues with no clear end in sight. In some areas, control efforts are working because targeted removal programs in tributaries and backwaters have reduced carp populations enough that native fish show signs of recovery. In the Illinois River near Havana, intensive commercial fishing has removed millions of pounds of carp since 2010. And researchers report that gizzard shad and buffalo fish, species that had nearly disappeared, are slowly returning. But in other areas, carp continue to spread because they've been documented in nearly every major tributary of the Mississippi, from the Arkansas River to the Minnesota River. And they continue advancing northward at a rate of approximately 50 miles per year. Climate change may actually help them, because warming waters extend their suitable habitat range farther north, potentially allowing them to eventually colonize areas they currently can't survive. And here's something scientists recently discovered that makes the situation even more complex in some invaded areas. Native fish are adapting. Channel catfish, gizzard, shad, and some sunfish species show evidence of dietary shifts, consuming different food sources to avoid competing directly with carp, and some predators, including flathead catfish and blue catfish, have begun eating juvenile carp, providing at least some natural control. It's not enough to reverse the invasion, but it suggests that ecosystems might eventually reach a new equilibrium, one very different from the original but perhaps sustainable. The real question isn't whether carp will be eradicated, because they almost certainly won't be, but rather whether they can be controlled enough to prevent total ecosystem collapse. Here's the uncomfortable truth that the Asian carp invasion forces us to confront. Once an invasive species becomes firmly established in a massive interconnected waterway system, eradication becomes virtually impossible. The Mississippi River basin is simply too vast, carp reproduce too quickly, and removal efforts, while valiant and sometimes effective locally, can't keep pace with population growth across the entire system. This is a battle that will continue for generations, costing hundreds of millions of dollars and requiring perpetual vigilance and effort just to maintain the status quo. But there's a larger lesson here, because Asian carp weren't released maliciously by irresponsible pet owners or introduced through careless accident alone. They were deliberately imported by scientists and aquaculture managers who genuinely believed they were making a smart decision. They saw a problem, algae in fish ponds, and found what seemed like an elegant biological solution, but they failed to ask the critical questions. What happens if these fish escape? Can they survive in American rivers? Do they have natural predators here? What are the long-term ecological consequences? And once the fish escaped, once they reached the Mississippi, once they began reproducing, it was already too late to stop them. Prevention is the only real solution, because keeping invasive species out in the first place is infinitely easier and cheaper than trying to eradicate them after establishment. Countries like Australia and New Zealand learned this lesson the hard way with rabbits, cane toads, and rats, and now they have some of the strictest biosecurity laws on Earth, inspecting every shipment, every container, every traveler, because they know that one escaped species can cost billions. The United States is learning the same lesson, but slowly and expensively. If there's any hope in this story, it's this: the battle isn't over, and in some places, humans are winning, or at least holding the line. Every carp removed is one less breeding fish. Every barrier strengthened is another obstacle to spread. And every dollar invested in research brings us closer to better solutions. Maybe someday we'll develop a carp-specific virus, or a genetic control method, or perhaps native predators will evolve to exploit this abundant food source more effectively. Or maybe Americans will learn to love eating carp, and commercial fishing pressure will finally bring populations under control. But until that day comes, if it ever does, the war on Asian carp continues in America's rivers, fought by scientists, fishermen, and engineers who refuse to let the Mississippi and the Great Lakes become carp-dominated wastelands. The fish that arrived in 1972 as helpers have become invaders, and what was meant to be a solution has become one of America's most expensive ecological mistakes. If this story shocked you, you had no idea that a fish brought in to eat algae could take over an entire river system. And share it, talk about it, and remember it the next time someone suggests introducing a foreign species to solve a problem. Let's make sure the Asian carp disaster remains a cautionary tale, not a blueprint for future mistakes. What do you think? Should we permanently close the Chicago Canal to protect the Great Lakes, even if it costs billions in lost shipping revenue? Or is there a better solution science hasn't found yet? Share your thoughts in the comments below, and don't forget to like, subscribe, and hit the notification bell so you don't miss more wild and unbelievable animal tales. Because when it comes to invasive species, the truth is always more complicated and more devastating than anyone expected. Thanks for watching, and next time, we'll explore another incredible ecological story that will leave you speechless. Stay curious, stay wild.